Hey there, I am Lauren Kramer with More Miles Run Coaching, and I am here with Scott Brook of More Miles Run Coaching. Hey, Scott, how are you today?
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, so we are here to talk about the primary training phase or your race specific phase. We started moving in this direction in our last call about the structure of periodization and what a full training cycle looks like. So now we have moved from your base training phase. We have picked out your goal race. We know how much time it's going to take you to prepare. And we are in the primary training phase. This is the heart of your training cycle. So we wanted to start off with talking about what that looks like, what it means, and how long you may spend in this cycle. So let's start there, Scott. Let's give a couple different examples of different distances. How much time can an athlete expect to spend in their primary training phase?
Yeah, as general guidelines based on the event or the distance that you're preparing for, it's going to be pretty much, for example, up to a half marathon. It could be 12 to 16 weeks is the time that you want to have during that training phase. For a marathon, it could be 16 to 20. And for an ultra, let's say 50K and above, 20 plus weeks. There's going to be some details in there, so it depends on sometimes how fit you are coming into that training cycle, which is going to dictate the exact time. Speaking in general terms, that's the time frame we look at.
Well, and that's our ideal, right? So sometimes it happens that, maybe something catches your interest or life gets in the way and interferes, and that timeline might flex a little bit. It really is highly variable to the individual and variable to the schedule. But that's our ideal is what we're looking at for the goal distance you're looking to complete. Now, okay, what goes into that time? So let's use the marathon maybe as an example. We're looking at 16 to 18 weeks, depending on the person in an ideal scenario. What does that phase look like? What are they doing within that time?
Yeah, so let's say if from a visual perspective, start at point A to point B, right? So if we're looking at 16 weeks, you start at the bottom and there's a progression. So we're going to build your volume, we're going to build your speed, whatever your workouts are. So typically you're going to go up a certain amount of time, whether that's in weeks, right? Let's use weeks, for example. You're going to go up and then you're going to come down for a week and rest and recover, then go back up, come down, go back up. Again, to the visual right there, I think it's good to point out that we're building, it's progression, right? Leading up to your goal. So you're going to go up, you're going to come down a little bit, up and down. And why coming down during that training cycle is to give your body rest and recovery, which is super important. You're building a lot of fatigue. We're aiming for some big goals, right? So you want to be able to rest and recover. It's not just climb, 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 and not have any rest in there. So specifically, yeah, we're going to go up, down. We're going to have build, recover, build, recover.
That's huge. I think a lot of people, if they haven't trained with an event or haven't trained for an event or worked with a coach before, I think that sometimes catches people off guard, that you imagine you're starting here and you're going to continuously build and work until you hit the goal. But you're right, recovery is huge. So you're going to see that in a broader sense across your training cycle. You are building the work that you're doing, but the gains and the improvements come during the recovery. You can only train as much as you can recover from. So it's when we build and then take those recovery weeks, that's when you really see the fitness improve. So it's not, you did a great job with your visual and I'm copying you right now with my hands. You build and then you recover, you build and you recover. It's not a perfectly continuous build throughout that. Now, as we're talking about that build and progression across so many weeks, let's talk a little bit about what you're building toward. So, we know we have this goal distance, this goal race and speed and pace at the end of it. How high can a person expect to be training? If you're training for a marathon, are you going to run a marathon in training, or what does that progression look like?
Yeah, that's a very common question, and sometimes a very common, I think, fear or worry is, can I cover that distance? And I need to run, let's say, to your point, your example of a marathon, I need to run 26 miles in training and practice, so I know what it's like on race day. And that's actually just not the case. We're not going to be throwing in marathons inside of a cycle if you're training for one. You might only go up to 20 miles. sometimes 22 miles as an example. Again, it's going to be based on your fitness level and where you are, but you're not going to be running your peak amount. And I think it's even more of an example, an extreme example, if you're running ultras, right? If you're going to run 50 miles or 100 miles, you're not going to go out on a Saturday afternoon and just train and run a random 50 or 100 miles. You can build some cumulative fatigue and effect in a certain amount of time frame in a shorter window, let's say like a weekend, right? But if you're talking about one specific run or one specific day, we're not going to be running 26 miles if your goal is to run 26 miles in the future for a goal race.
Yeah, I think that's important because a lot of people, especially if it's their first time or if they're really going for their fastest time, tend to, for the sake of confidence, feel like they need to build up very close, if not all the way to what their goal is before they actually go attempt the goal. But you're right. I think it's important to understand when you get to that goal race, the amount of effort and energy and demand on your body is huge, such that after that goal, we're taking weeks of recovery time coming off of it because the demand is just so big. We don't want to do that in training. We don't want to take weeks of recovery. We want to build, and continue onward. So we're only applying so much load, again, as you can recover from. But one thing you and I talk about quite often, especially in ultra distance, is what we're really looking at is not the amount of load that you're building in one particular run, in one long run, but it's the cumulative fatigue that you're building across a week, across multiple weeks, across multiple months in your training cycle. So ultras particularly, as you mentioned, if you're doing a 50-mile race, your longest run maybe is going to be 50K, more commonly even as low as like 26, a marathon, as training for 50 miles. That's almost half. Like that's a really big gap. So how do we get around that? How are we building enough fitness to complete 50 miles if in training in any given run we're only doing about half that distance?
Yeah, I think we could take a look at that. One phrase I like to say is the body only knows stress. It doesn't know miles. The body doesn't know, okay, I'm running 40 miles, 50 miles. It only knows how much it can handle at that particular time. So back to the point of we got to recover. So to answer your question, I think you can look at it in terms of time. Let's use a weekend. So if you're training for, let's say, a 50-mile run and you're only going to do 50K, 31 miles as your longest individual run, you may come back the next day and run, let's say, 10 miles or 12 miles. And so if you really think about it from a short time period standpoint, you can have a 36-hour window where you've run 42 miles. If you wrap your head around that, that's a little bit, I think, maybe easier to comprehend. Oh, now I can run 50 miles because I just ran 42 in a very short amount of time. I think maybe looking at it in terms of that 2-day window or time frame as opposed to one run is a good way to explain how you can really confidently build up to then say, yeah, I can run 50 miles.
Yeah, that's perfect. Spreading it over it's for ultra specifically over a 2-day load or even a 3-day, especially when we're looking at even longer ultra distances. Like you said, you can only take so much load in one particular run, but when you spread that out, you're suddenly doing almost the same load, but you've got recovery in there. You're going to eat, you're going to have multiple meals, you're going to sleep in between there. And that's where, a huge amount of your recovery, healing, and growth happens. So to put those 2 or 3 runs in such a narrow window, but getting that recovery time in between each one, you're able to train at a very large volume, but without doing the same damage and breakdown that you would do if you went for one run, single run of the same distance. And again, to the point that we made earlier, when you do go out for one of those big mega runs, the recovery demand on your body is so huge. And you might find, if you haven't done one before, you might find like even you can't sleep that night because your body is so damaged. And I say that not in a bad way. That's part of how we build fitness, is doing damage and healing and recovering from it. But again, the recovery demand is just so big the bigger the effort and the bigger the load. Yeah, so we really do spread it out. And again, it's cumulative. It's not what you're doing in your peak week of training. It's, you know, what you have built from start to finish, all the way back from week 1 through week 16, 18, 20, that really makes the difference.
Yeah, and I think
Oh, go
too,
ahead, sorry.
but I think too, inside of a week, I think another thing to point out too is if you see a hard effort, let's call it a workout on intervals, you know, speed work, let's say on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, you're typically going to find the next day, whether that's Wednesday or Thursday, you're going to have a very easy day. It could be a heart rate run, it could be a recovery run, and the reason, stress, recover. So you can even take that graph from a long timeline perspective, even down to a couple of days. Stress, recover, stress, recover. So I think that's important to call out too, the theory and the rationale behind why we need to really build in rest around our hard efforts.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you brought that up. And to even expand upon that point, it's not only, you know, making sure that you are honoring your recovery and you're not going out and trying to push hard every day, because that's just how you continue to break down, break down, break down. You don't get that healing and growth phase in there if you're not recovering. But also, you know, again, we're talking about a long time here. We're anywhere from 12 months to 20 months, or not months, 12 weeks to 20 weeks. That's 3 months up to 5 months that you're spending training. And again, this is your primary training phase. You really are doing a lot of work. You're doing a lot of volume. You're doing a lot of quality within that total volume that you're doing. So this is the time that all of the extras outside of the work you're doing on your feet become extra important. Like when we were talking before the call, you mentioned sleep. Sleep is huge. Again, that's where your recovery happens. What other kind of things are off of your feet are going to be really important through this primary training phase when we're really building a lot of work?
Yeah, I mean, sleep is king. That's paramount. So you look at sleep, you look at nutrition. What are you eating? When are you eating it? Hydration. I mean, just getting in fluids, getting in water. And I'll use an example of right now in the summertime, right? If you're training for any distance, it doesn't matter if it's a 5K up to an ultra, you've got to be hydrating. And don't think of hydration necessarily as only on the run or right before the run. It's throughout the week. You want to stay well hydrated. So I would say nutrition, I would say hydration, I would say sleep. Also, I mean, you can work with a coach in terms of rolling and stretching and kind of those things really to loosen up the muscles in the legs. Because again, there's a lot of fatigue, there's a lot of stress going on our bodies. So there's things you can do outside of running, of getting out the door to help heal, recover, and still get some good quality work in, even if you're not pounding the pavement and out there running.
Yeah, I agree. I think mobility and strength is still really important in that primary training phase. And I think that is usually the first to go, followed by nutrition is usually the second to go. When you just get so tired and you get so fatigued. And that's kind of a rule of thumb I like to stick to, that when you're training for a big event, you're putting in, you know, we keep saying volume, a lot of time. That really is, again, to the individual, it's only as much as you can recover from. But you are doing this repetitive forward movement. You're taking thousands of repetitions every run that you go on. So if you don't have the energy or the time left in your day to do mobility work and to do strength to keep you healthy while you're doing that continuous forward repetitive, I think that's the point, that it's too much. If you don't have the energy or the time to do the extras, we need to dial down the run training to make sure you do, so that we're not sacrificing the recovery for the sake of the training. There's got to be that balance and trade-off there, that we have time and energy for both.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you taught me something recently or last year was, you know, strength training, right? And a lot of times you'll see strength training on the same day as, let's say, a key workout or a hard workout or whatever the case may be. There's a reason for that. You know, we're trying to put the fatigue and the stress right here, recovery here, right? So a lot of people may think, well, I'm going to have a hard workout or a long run, and the next day, that's when I'll hit the gym and do some weights and do some strength. And sometimes that's okay, but many times you want to do them close together so you can really focus on the recovery. The recovery is just as important as nailing those hard workouts.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up too. And even to elaborate on that a little bit, that strength doesn't have to be an hour in the gym. You know, we're not looking for monster sessions here. Sort of the quote that I like to use is that you don't need more exercise. You're already getting plenty of exercise in your running training. You really just need that little bit of mobility and extra load and, you know, moving your body in a different way. But we don't need, you know, when we, like you said, when we're loading a big run day and a strength session on the same day, that does not mean 2 hours here and 1 hour here. It really, you know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes that you can fit in there to move your body differently is the goal. So yeah, and you're right, making sure that you are on your recovery days, you are truly recovering. You're not adding more load on those days.
Exactly.
All right, so this sort of leads into our next conversation. Not quite, but a little bit, it connects. So the next time that we make a video, we are going to be talking about the mental game and motivation, anxiety, and all of the mental aspects of training. So we've talked a lot about the training itself and the workload that you're doing. But the mental aspect is a huge piece of that, and we really want to get into that next. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today or leading into our next topic, on mental fitness for your training, feel free to leave a comment, or you can contact us directly. You can find us at moremilestogo.com, or on social, you can find us at More Miles Run Coaching on any of the social platforms. All right, I will talk to you next time, Scott. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Lauren.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.